Hey, they're at it again. There's been a deadly terrorist attack in Tunisia, as well as this one on a massacre on a beach. Gunmen targeted beachgoers near two hotels, murdering at least 27 people. It happened in the coastal city resort of Sos. Officials say the victims were mostly tourists. Muslims likely would not be at that beach location during their holy month of Ramadan. Well, let's go now to Ephraim Graham for today's top stories.
Pat, it is a clear-cut case of jiggery pokery. That is the scathing assessment from the Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. He says the court has done somersaults yet again to rewrite President Obama's health care law. In fact, while some used to call the law Obamacare, Scalia says it should now be called SCOTUS care. Paul Strand has the story.
Fight, 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 fight. Healthcare is a human right. Fight, 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 fight. Healthcare is a human right.
Foes of Obamacare are finding few friends on the Supreme Court with this second rescue of the Affordable Care Act by the justices.
So with yet another decision supporting the law, some folks are wondering whether the court has Obamacare's back no matter what the issue is.
Todd Graziano was in the court when dissenting Justice Scalia blasted the decision.
Justice Scalia really made a convincing case that the majority of the court has twice tortured the Affordable Care Act, first to dismiss constitutional arguments, and today, really to rewrite the statutes.
Then Graziano said Scalia joked.
As many times as the court has rewritten it, it should really be called SCOTUS care.
But on the court plaza, supporters of the act were rejoicing when they heard 6 of the justices ruled the phrasing that subsidies could only come through the state meant they could come from either a state or the federal government. That meant 6 to 8 million Americans in danger of losing their subsidies keep them, and Congress loses a huge chance to revamp the law.
It's a great day for healthcare in America, and for a lot of people who get their healthcare through the ACA and whose health is on the line or lives are on the line as a result of this law, and we're going in the right direction.
A lot of people were relying on this to be a victory. A lot of people have healthcare that have never had healthcare before, and so it was really important that we did win.
And President Obama couldn't be happier as the foes of Obamacare were beat back once again.
After more than 50 votes in Congress to repeal or weaken this law, after a presidential election based in part on preserving or repealing this law, after multiple challenges to this law before the Supreme Court, the Affordable Care Act is here to stay.
Ed Haselmeyer at the Heritage Foundation said not so fast. The fight over Obamacare isn't over yet.
All the problems that were there before are still going to be there. The political controversy is still going to be there. It just simply, I think, shifts the timing a little bit. Instead of it being dealt with right now, it's probably going to be dealt with in another year or two after the elections.
So the good thing is no one loses their subsidy and the status quo is maintained. But critics complain it also is keeping a bad plan in place. Paul Strand, CBN News, the Supreme Court.
And Pat, this is not the ruling many were hoping for.
Well, it's not, but we wonder about John Roberts. It's almost, he's going to back up Obama regardless. It's just amazing. He's tortured some things. For example, Obama clearly said that this was not a tax. He said this is not a tax. He said it, he's not a tax. So what does Chief Justice Roberts say? He said it is a tax. And therefore, it has nothing to do with the Commerce Clause. It is a taxing of power, and Congress has a perfect right to do it. And then he comes in, and the law clearly states that unless these exchanges were set up by a state, they were invalid, and now they're being paid for by the federal government. And the Chief Justice again said, well, Congress really didn't intend that. They intended something else, and here's what they really meant. Justices shouldn't do that. They shouldn't rewrite law. They should say, look, this is what the law says. It's poorly drafted. I recommend it go back to Congress and let them try again. But that's the way it is. So it's probably better to have a judge that looks that way than somebody who decides that he's an activist and he's going to rewrite everything. I think they look at this as judicial restraint. You know, we're not going to interfere with the other branch of government. Ephraim?
Pat, one person was beheaded and several others injured in an attack on a gas factory in southeastern France. Officials say banners with Arabic writing were found near the victim's body. It happened this morning in the region of Azir, near the city of Lyon. Two men drove their car into the factory entrance, touching off an explosion when they crashed into gas canisters. French authorities say multiple suspects are in custody. Be sure to check back with CBNnews.com throughout the day as we update this story. The Obama administration officials are deflecting blame for a massive breach of federal government computers. As Dale Hurd reports, new details are coming out about how the theft has seriously damaged national security.
It's being called the worst hack of the U.S. government in history. Hackers looted federal government personnel records affecting as many as 32 million current and former employees. After a grilling this week on Capitol Hill of officials from the Office of Personnel Management, one lawmaker called the lack of cybersecurity at OPM jaw-dropping.
1963, I wasn't even born yet. And that's the system that we're operating on in this day and age when technology is changing moment by moment, minute by minute.
The hack has been a disaster for American counterintelligence. When the White House admitted that OPM had been hacked in early June, it said that Chinese hackers had stolen the personal information of up to 4 million current and former federal employees. We now know the damage is far greater. Hackers made off with millions of security clearance background check files, so-called adjudication information, sensitive facts collected by U.S. investigators about government employees and contractors, deeply personal information such as marital problems, drug and alcohol or gambling problems, even information about a person's sex life. That means China or another foreign entity now has the powers to find U.S. officials who have access to classified documents and blackmail them. A source told the Daily Beast website this is worse than the leaks by Edward Snowden.
So I want to understand why OPM isn't using encryption.
I wish that our systems, all of our systems, were able to be fitted with the encryption tools. But we have an older legacy system.
Catherine Archuleta, director of the Office of Personnel Management, said encryption would not have prevented the incident.
If there's anyone to blame, it is the perpetrators. How they're concentrated, very well funded, focused, aggressive.
Some Republicans are saying Archuleta cannot be trusted to fix this problem and needs to be replaced. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Pat, this is just downright unbelievable.
Well, it is unbelievable. And look, in the private sector, that lady would have been fired the minute this thing happened, and there would be accountability all up and down the line. You won't find one person lose their job, and they'll go on like this because it's inefficient. Apparently, the system we use recognizes previous hacks. If there have been one, then this system we use can spot it. But if somebody comes with a novel way of hacking your system, our software can't handle it. It's just that way. It's terrible. The fact to think what the Chinese can do with that information, they'll compromise people, their sex lives, they're having affairs, they'll have it all public, they can come out and bring it out against them. They can go to them and say, look, we know what your children are doing, we know what you've done, and we therefore will need this confidential information from you, or else we're going public and you'll be shamed and destroyed. This is an awful thing. It's an awful thing that the confidential information of millions of federal workers and past workers are now being laid bare and are in the hands of the Chinese. It's awful. But this is because of the incompetence of the government. It is incompetent, and every time you turn around, there's one more area of incompetence. The Veterans Administration, incompetence in a massive. The IRS, incompetence. Now the Office of Personnel Management, incompetence. One thing after another, and nothing being done about it, nobody fired, people being kept on their jobs. And you've got this thing about Lois Lerner. We'll be talking about that maybe later in this program, but here the IRS is covering that up, and you feel so helpless, like, what can I do with this monster? that is sucking so much money out of the economy, and yet they are incompetent. Ephraim?
Pat, a new revelation in the Hillary Clinton email scandal. State Department officials now admit 15 work-related emails sent and received by Clinton are missing from their records. The emails all surfaced this week during investigation on Benghazi by the House of Representatives. All the emails predate the September 2012 terror attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi. The chairman of the House investigation says the emails confirm Clinton did not provide all work-related emails she kept on a personal email server during her time as Secretary of State. Donald Trump's Miss USA pageant has been taken off the air by a major Hispanic network. Spanish-language Univision announced this week it is cutting ties with the Republican presidential candidate over comments he made about Mexican immigrants.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
Univision called those comments insulting to Mexican immigrants. The network says it will not air the July 12th Miss USA pageant, which Trump partially owns. Trump says he will sue Univision. A New Jersey jury has ruled that a Jewish nonprofit committed fraud by offering gay conversion therapy. 4 men filed a lawsuit in 2012 under New Jersey's consumer fraud laws, saying the group didn't cure them. The Jewish group says it didn't make guarantees and should be allowed to help people struggling with unwanted same-sex attraction. The Freedom of Conscience Defense Fund says the ruling will have a chilling effect on religious liberty. The fund's lead counsel saying the jury reached the wrong conclusion because the judge refused to allow highly qualified expert witnesses to testify that change is possible for many people. Authorities say arsonists burned 2 predominantly African-American churches, one in North Carolina and the other in Georgia. Investigators say patterns found in the ruins of Briar Creek Road Baptist Church in Charlotte suggest arson, but they aren't calling them a hate crime. The fire caused about $250,000 in damage, but the sanctuary is untouched. The pastor is speaking out, saying ashes can be an environment for healing.
These buildings can be repaired, you know, and so it's an opportunity for hearts to be repaired as well. We really want to actually cover it in love. We actually don't have any malice against anyone else.
Meanwhile, there is a $10,000 reward in the arson attack on a church in Macon, Georgia this week. Flames consumed the roof and caved in the God's Power Church of Christ early Tuesday morning. Burglars have hit the church twice in the past year, and the pastor believes the crimes could be connected. Christians in Cuba received more than 83,000 Bibles earlier this month. The Bibles sent by the International Missions Board come at a time of growth in the evangelical church in Cuba. The Baptist Convention in Cuba is distributing the Bibles to believers in more than 1,000 churches all over the island. Bibles have not been sold in Cuban bookstores for more than 50 years. The only place people can get one is at church. And churches rely on Bible donations, which have hit a hard time keeping up with the growing number of believers in the past few years. Pat, that's kind of a nice problem to have.
Oh, that's good news. That is great news. And I understand there's a tremendous religious revival going on in Cuba, and that's also good news.